I hear sound but no voices. What?
To
All
help you
right,
out.
before I unburden myself of this heartbreaking tale of woe, actually, I don't have that many heartbreaking tales of woe, but I can make one up, I'm sure. Am I being heard and understood? Well,
To
all
help you
right,
out.
before I unburden
Clearly different
myself of
things
this
may not be
heartbreaking tale
possible.
of woe,
But
actually, I don't have at least heard. So, what do you think?
Thanks, Will.
All right. So since we were having sound issues, I will start again. Hello, everyone. My name is Lesley Connor, and Jason and I are here with Scott Edelman. Scott has a story in the newest issue of Apex
What
Magazine.
number would that be, Lesley?
That's issue 134. I remembered it right off for first thing. And I was asking Scott if he would tell us a little bit about his story.
Well, my story is called Learning to Accept What's to Come. And I will be intrigued to see what people think of the story, because when I saw how Lesley describes the story in the editorial and how I describe the story in my inner mind, I think Lesley used the words bleak, devastating, heartbreaking, something like that. And I think of it as a bittersweet love story. So I look forward to seeing which side the readers come down on when they have it. It's a unspecified future when things have gone wrong with the world, and there may or may not be many humans left, and the robots are struggling to make it through that world and survive on their own, perhaps. So I don't want to give too many spoilers, but that's basically the setting of the tale. And it's one of those stories that came to me when we talk about how do we deal with the times in which we live, and what do we think about the slow apocalypse we're going through, and all the other things, avoid thinking on election day it's the slow apocalypse we're going through, and how people respond to it. And one of the responses I had, some people write more horror or less horror. One of the things I was doing was writing fewer stories with people in it, fewer stories in which the United States still existed hundreds of years in the future, and that's how I dealt with it. And that's why I feel as long as you're happy about the future of AIs getting along together and robots getting along together, as long as you're not too deeply invested in humanity, you can still see an upside to many of the things I was doing. So this is sort of one of the stories I was doing in response to that. But to my mind, it truly is a robot love story.
I love that you think of it that way, because I'm trying to not reveal spoilers. I came away not knowing whether I liked the main character, and that's why I love the story.
Okay.
Like, I was like, ooh. Yeah, that's the only way I can say it without revealing too much.
Well, yes, I could see you reading the story and saying I did not like some of the choices the protagonist character made towards other characters within the story, whose identities, is whether they are made of flesh and blood or whether they are made of machine parts, we will not reveal. But I could see that. But I saw it as having a happy ending for certain of the characters in the story. And so I came away. To me, it's always, what is the final beat of a story? You can have devastating things happen before, and gee, we're sorry this thing or that thing happened. But if in those final moments there's some happiness perhaps achieved, without giving away too many spoilers, but,
I love how we're trying to like talk around
talk
the
around
ending.
it.
We're
But
like, can't say too much.
if you like unusual love stories between, sentient and not necessarily flesh and blood characters, maybe you'll like it. That's why I'm looking forward to hearing what others make of it, because everyone takes a different message from a story. There are some people who have read stories, they just weep, and other people laugh.
Yeah,
People react differently to horror too. This isn't a horror story, this is a science fiction story, but there are people who can see something horrific and they just laugh as if they're on a roller coaster, and someone else, their guts are torn up and they cry and they can't take it. And it's the same thing in a different manner with science fiction. So that's why, as I said, if you read the editorial, which you can read, the editorial is for free for people to read right now.
Yes,
The story is now available only to subscribers and to purchases of the individual issue over on Amazon, however it is sold through the Apex site. And other people will have to wait 6 weeks. But why do that? Why would you want to wait till December 20th, I think, to read this when you can read it today?
Yeah.
Really? Is that the day it's coming out?
I think it says December 20th.
December 20th.
Yeah.
It's the last original piece that we're posting.
Saving it as a Christmas holiday gift.
It is. It's my gift to everybody.
A heartwarming robot love story for Christmas.
Well, what's fascinating about the story is I prepared for this conversation because I suspected we might. I know we say we're just publishing and editing and all sorts of random, more general things, but I thought that people always said, "Where did the story come from? How did you think the story up, or whatever?" And I went back and I've been keeping a daily journal since longer than a lot of people are alive. November 2nd, 1978, I started keeping a daily journal. So I have tons and tons of books which I have expressed the desire on online and in social media to someday burn them all, but we can discuss that at some future date. But I was able to go back and find the precise moment that I thought of the story and how I thought of the story. And sometimes I think I've written too many horror stories. I feel like I want to write a science fiction story. I have an idea for a science fiction story. I have a whole list of them, and I don't know which one to choose. And one of the things I've sometimes done in the past is made up a list of fake anthologies that I might submit to. Like, let's say, here are 20 possible themed anthologies. Let me just start making a list and see if one of them just sparks something in my head. So on the day that the idea came up, I just made this list, and the list went time travel, alien invasion, the post-human future, the last person on Earth, robots, deep space, artificial intelligence, rocket ships, nuclear war, nanotechnology, and then I wrote, and then I sort of put brackets around last person on Earth and robots, and said, the last robots on Earth? And from that, then I wrote, I'm going to think on that last robot on Earth for a while. What would it be? What would happen? And from that is where the story came. And then I basically wrote down 7 or 8 different possible stories that could arise from that. And did I want a happy ending or a miserable ending? What was my mood? And these times I don't want to give people a terribly sad ending, but I wrote down one of the things I wrote: no idea is too ridiculous. And then basically give yourself permission. I tell this to people: give yourself permission to be stupid as you want. I have one that was not used. Feel free to take it. Aliens visit destroyed Earth, and all they find is a lone robot. The robot tells the story of our civilization as it was his civilization, as a false narrative. So that's just one of the many possibilities once you get that first thing. And I just kept going and going until I got to the one that ended up being the story. And I do more words, and I'm a pantser, not a plotter, so I had no idea how this would end. And I do more writing about a story in terms of wordage than I do for a story, because after I write a scene, I say, well, gee, I wonder what happens next. There are probably 20 different things that could happen next. And then I'll just write all the possible, all the branches And people ask, do I get stuck? It's, well, no, I don't really get stuck, because when I say, gee, I don't know what the next scene would be, I just make a list of all the possible ones, and eventually you arrive at building the story that says what I arrive at where the story is that I want it to be. And then, of course, you say, oh my God, now that I've arrived at an ending that I like, the beginning does not match the end, or how do I do it all? People talk about foreshadowing, and I do aftershadowing, meaning I figure out what the heck the story is supposed to be, and then I go to the beginning and do a lot of revision to make it all fit together. Now you see why I write short stories and not novels, because I am not a plotter. I don't have a murder board of every little beat that happens in the story. It's all very organic for me.
That's fascinating, because now I'm like thinking about the story and how you got to the end. Oz is trying to get up in my lap.
Yeah. All of my outlining happens after I finish the first draft of the story, and then I outline it to say, okay, was there something missing here? Was there a scene I wrote that I didn't need? And so there's a lot of hacking and slashing. If you looked at my manuscripts, everything is crossed out and rearranged and lines written through. It's a very intense, revision is very intense for me, and I actually like revision more. Well, I enjoy it all, but I mean, to me, revision is when the world really falls away and I'm just staring at the page and saying, okay, how do I put all these pieces together? It's sort of like, if anyone saw Queen's Gambit, the chess playing one.
No,
well,
I haven't.
the lead protagonist is when she's thinking of the chess moves, she's sort of in bed, and on the ceiling, all the chess pieces are moving around all over the place. And she's, until she finally sees it, it's almost not a conscious thought thing. It's a very intuitive, organic, improvisational thing, and that's the way I work. And somehow I've turned out all these stories, but I once heard Peter Straub say something, and the late Peter Straub, I wish he was still with us, but he said, once I can see what's on the other side of the crevasse, I have no interest in building a bridge to it. And that's the way I am with the story. If I sat down and I knew the whole story, I'd say, I have nothing to learn now, therefore there's no need to write the story. I know all the beats. Okay, I figured it out. It told me what I wanted to know, meaning I'm learning something in writing the story, and for other people to like it is gravy. So if I already knew it, I can't, sketch the whole thing out. So I actually have to, every once in a while, I do almost have a whole story come into my head. I have to suppress it, because if I know the whole path, I have no need to walk it. Again, it might have been a great story, but to me that seems too facile. I don't learn anything from it, and I only want to do the things that are difficult for me. I'm a play to your weaknesses, not play to your strengths kind of guy. To pull all the weaknesses up to the level, so when you need that tool, you have that particular muscle ready. So I could go on forever, but you don't want to just listen to an hour of me. Wait, it's happy hour.
Well, you are the guest. People are here for you. So Lesley and I, do this quarterly snap judgment thing. And we try to be encouraging and try to, make it helpful. And you had some encouraging words on your Twitter recently. I think it was right after you had told the story to us.
I'm very much a never give up, never surrender kind of guy. It took me to go even back before this particular sale, and I'll talk about what this sale represents. It took me 44 years of trying to sell an analog. I sold analog a story in 1972 when I was 16 years old, and I did not sell them a story through, was it 3 or 4 editors, until 2016. And it got to the point where I wanted to sell the story as much to be able to be an object lesson for people to never give up, that if you're enjoying what you're doing, you should just keep going, that no one's rejecting you personally, they're rejecting the story. That I think that's an important lesson to learn. And after I sold a story to Apex and a story to Lightspeed in the same year, and I went on after all the contracts were signed, I don't like announcing anything before that happened. Something could go wrong. And I think I didn't look up the exact number. This might have been my 14th submission to Apex, I think, something like that, either the 14th or 16th submission. And I wanted to tell people, look, some people might get rejected once and twice from a market and say, well, I guess they don't like what I do. And if you're confident in your craft, you have to realize that once you're at that certain level, it truly is just a matter of taste. That the editor, the publisher is looking for a story they love so much. It's like when you're reading a book and you get to a story or a novel that you want to run to all your friends and crow about it. It can't just be good or competent. It also has to hit those personal bullet points, the buttons of that person, the thing that really makes them smile or weep or laugh or whatever. So you personally are not rejected. And I guess I just sort of had that confidence that I sort of recognized, okay, well, they're just rejecting this. And having been on the other end and editing Science Fiction Age and reading 10,000 stories a year to buy 35 stories, I recognize that, it's difficult and the odds aren't necessarily in your favor. Well, but they are in your favor to the extent that once you've hit a certain level of competency, you're above like 90% of the folks, and then you're dealing with that taste issue. So I always want people, well, I hope they enjoy doing it enough. I mean, if they really hate it, if writing is a painful, painful thing, and I've had friends who were like that, who said, why don't I just play the guitar instead? I'm always happy when I play the guitar, and this thing is just too much, and even if I sold the story, I don't know that I'd be happy. That's a whole different thing. But as long as you enjoy it as a hobby, I'd be doing this even if I wasn't selling stories, or for stories that took 10 or 15 years to sell, because when I've achieved what I think of as the story as it's supposed to be, there's just a tremendous joy to it. And you just have to hope that, I mean, I know life is short and not everyone will last like 44 more years to sell stories to analog or something like that. But, as long as you're taking joy in it and happy with it and learning it, I mean, some people will just go play golf several times a week. So let's say you're writing stories several nights a week. It's the same kind of thing, as long as it's fun for you, and don't count on that outside validation. I mean, I want people to read the stories, and I want them to get something out of it, and I want them to, take a piece of me and what I think of the world away with them. But I get enough joy that I go on, and that's why I often make lists of, and I know John Wiswell does this too at the end of the year. If you follow John on Twitter, John will say things like, well, let's see, last year I got rejected 82 times and I submitted 112 times. And I sort of do the same thing every January, just so people know that, people say, wait, what do you mean? You're getting rejected too? Now, I say, of course I get rejected. I don't think of myself as any kind of superstar or even a star, but, I want people to know we all get rejected, because it really is that taste thing. And, as long as you're sure you're saying what you want to say in the story, have the confidence in it. Obviously, listen to criticism if it matches. If something goes off when people give you a criticism and it matches something that you were sort of thinking about subliminally anyway, yeah, you can make a tweak here and there, but just keep going on and keep submitting. I don't know whether Jason or Lesley know what the person who most sent a story and took to get rejected, but I remember I was with Sheila Williams of Asimov once at Nebula, and there was someone she just bought a story from. I can't remember who it was. And he said, well, that's my 63rd story I sent you, something like that, 63rd, 64th submission to Asimov for him. And he was just, he'd write a story. And
yeah, that was recent, right? I don't recall who that was. I do recall it being a name that I recognized and was kind of surprised.
Yeah, well, hey, there's a market I will share, which not to put pressure on the market or anything, because again, I have I've been rejected by my closest friends and accepted by people I know don't like me very much. It's a story. It's really all the story that matters. But my very first time I ever sent a story in anywhere, I was 15 years old. I mailed the story to Ed Furman at Fantasy and Science Fiction. The envelope came back 3 days later, back in the day when you were mailing out manila envelopes. And I said, Oh no, I must have accidentally put the return envelope on the outside and mailed it to myself because it was only 3 days later. Well, he rejected it in 3 days, because it went from Brooklyn, New York to, I guess, Stamford, Connecticut, and then back in 3 days. But I've been submitting to Fancy and Science Fiction since 1971 through 5 editors. And, if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. And if it clicks, it'll just be because it's a very matter of personal taste between the editor and the writer. And at this point, as with analog, I'd like to make a sale as much to be able to say to people, hey, look, people, look, you writers out there, just do it. Just keep writing. Just keep sending the stories out. It's not you. And someday you're going to click. And, that's what I hope the lesson that people end up taking from doing from that. And my own personal thing is I write so many different kinds of stories. It might take longer for me just because of the way I do it. Someone who is always writing science fiction or always writing horror, you might send analog, 4 or 5 stories a year or something like that. But if you're saying, okay, well, first I'm writing a science fiction story and set in our space, and then I'm writing a horror story, that I can't send that same editor, and then I'm writing something that's unicorns and so on, and then I'm writing a crime story that can only go to Alfred Hitchcock. There are some editors that might only get a story of yours once a year. So some people might be able to condense what took me if you're just more sharply focused. But I just bounce around all over the place. Not I know in the John Clute in the science fiction encyclopedia describes me as something, perhaps not as well known, because I have all these editing jobs where I've edited a lot of magazines, perhaps not as well known for short fiction because of his inability to do marketing consistency, or I forget exactly the word he used like that, but obviously, okay, he recognizes that I'm hopping around all over the place, and it's probably a third horror, a third science fiction, a third Twilight Zone fantasy, and then a few metafictional things. So, if you're looking to really hone a market, and study a market and write for that particular market, you don't necessarily do that. I sort of write on the right and hope someone out there is copacetic with what I'm trying to do, and that's my way of doing it. Doesn't work for everybody. Wouldn't work for everybody, but
yeah, I didn't know until recently that you used to edit several magazines. Not just one.
Well, I mean, my first job was editing the British reprint books at Marvel Comics, and then I worked as an assistant editor on staff at Marvel Comics. I edited, 6 or 8 magazines for Sovereign Media, from 92 to 2000, Science Fiction Age and Sci-Fi Universe and Sci-Fi Entertainment, a professional wrestling magazine. Sci-Fi Flicks, a whole bunch of, so I don't know how many issues I did altogether over, but at one point it's usually 4 bi-monthlies at a time in alternating months. So it's like 2 a month were going to print. These are physical print ones. And then I edited a magazine called Satellite Orbit, which was for about 9 months, which was about a 300 or 400 page magazine that was for people who had satellite dishes, not direct TV, but those 8-footers you'd have in the backyard. And then I worked for the Sci-Fi Channel for 13 years, editing Science Fiction Weekly Blaster and whatever else there were, Sci-Fi and Wired, Sci-Fi Wire, which was their newsy thing. So yeah, a lot of editing in there, and so I've seen life from both sides now. I'll sing the Cloud Song with Joni Mitchell in a moment, but
see in the chat that Marie Vibert said she submitted 69 times to Clark's World before they bought one. That's awesome.
Wow.
That's awesome, Marie.
Good thing. Good for you. That is wonderful. Yep. That's the way to do it. I've lost track of how many I've sent there, but I got them all written down. I got to keep a chart to make sure I'm sending things, and I'm not accidentally sending things to the same person, and always checking the markets. And also then you have ones, well, is this horror or this science, is it dark fantasy or this horror? Because people are very specific about what kind of horror it is. And then you've got the issue, a lot of markets, I read of a market and I say, wow, that sounds perfect with this story. Oh, they don't want anything over 2,000 words. Okay. My sweet spot is 5 to 7, and sometimes it's under 5. It's easier to sell under 5. There are a lot of places that they auto reject on the the electronic submission system if it exceeds the count. And I can understand that, but sometimes when I write them, it's like, oh well, I just cut out 5 or 6 markets with this one because I just it was what the story is in charge.
From the editing perspective, those 6,000 to 7,000 word stories can be a harder sale just because it takes a bigger bite of the budget.
Right.
Like I only have so many words to play with every issue, so
I think Warren Lapine, I can't remember what Warren's magazine used to be, was fantastic for a while. There was the print one, and then I think it went online, and then he was discovering with certain stories, he cut it back to, the 5 to 7 range because he was buying 10,000 word stories and seeing people were giving up, halfway through. And maybe that was pre-Moby, pre where, okay, you could go longer if you're going to read it on your Kindle or your other device, but reading something at that length on a screen can be a bit much. So I wonder if it would have been a different story in this kind of marketplace than back then.
I'm not sure if we see a fall off with people not wanting to read longer stories. It really comes down to I could definitely only have one in that length per issue, because if not, then I don't have enough words left for the rest of.
I forget, what is your max 10? I don't remember what your max is that you have in your guidelines.
7,500.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So those ones are a little harder to fit in. I might have to.
We do publish a lot on them, though.
We do.
Yeah.
But it's like we have to space them out. Like.
Well, mine was, let's see, 6,350. It says on mine. Yes. And the thing I'm interested to know that I haven't seen it yet because though I have, we proofed it, we went over it together. Don't you have a reading time that you have on each story, or my? How did you determine what is the reading time for my story? Does it vary based on just the number of words or the complexity of the sentences, or do you run it through a system, or how do you do it?
It's based on an arcane and magical formula that was derived in the Middle English.
Reading, huh?
No, it's a. Honestly, it's a plug-in, and you tell it, if you're American English or British English, and then you give it a estimated reading speed. I think I have it at 225 words a minute.
Huh. Yeah, the only time I know how long a story of mine takes is when I'm getting ready to go to a convention and they say do a reading, and you've got that half an hour, let's say, and you want 5 minutes to just let people get into the room and just chitter chatter, and then 5 minutes at the end so you can let the next people in. And so it's very rare that I can read a complete anything. I generally have to. Sometimes I start and say, what's the worst cliffhangery moment I can stop that has the audience go, damn it, Scott. Every once in a while someone has grown because, there was one that was great because I had one. And then he opened the box and discovered, well, that's all we have time for. This you'll have to pick up the issue. If you can do it with that real break off. So every once in a while I can read a complete one, but not often. I think I read something complete at Worldcon, but it's very, very rare that I have anything short enough. Particularly since I try not to. When I'm doing a reading, I don't quite talk as quickly as I speak. When we're speaking now, I'm trying to do a more dramatic, slow, with dramatic pauses and intonations and everything. So it can take longer than you think it is if you're really trying to be dramatic about it for an audience.
Definitely.
And plus, if it's just you reading, you don't want to have the reading go on too long because people will get antsy.
Yeah, well, some people are wonderful readers. If anyone, Lesley, you've been to horror conventions. I don't know if Jason, if you've been enough to see someone like F. Paul Wilson read a story. He will pace
Gary
the room.
Bronbeck is another.
Yeah, well, yeah, I know Paul will pace the room and he'll like suddenly turn and talk to this person, then talk to that person, and he'll do all the voices, and he'll be marching up and down and everything. So his is quite entertaining. And then some people, I just love hearing the sound of their voice, like Joe Lansdale.
Joe Lansdale's
You
really
know,
good.
I don't have a voice like that, but as Joe Lansdale, I love hearing Andy Duncan read. There are some people who have that storyteller voice.
Brian Keane.
Yep, and who are very good with when to go down to a whisper and when to start shouting, because that's the worst thing about going to a reading sometimes, and you realize it's just this one level of volume and voice and emotion, and they're either rushing to get through. It's not nervousness. It's not that the third person is nervous. It's that they're not saying I'm doing a dramatic performance in a small way. So most of the people I see are good, and their personality is able to come through. But,
well, and that's a totally separate writing skill, because it is sort of one of those skills that hopefully you curate. You get the chance to read your stuff aloud, but that's a totally different skill than writing, or editing your work.
And the funny thing is, one of the reasons I'm a writer is because I didn't want to deal with rejection. So back when I was in high school, I was acting, and in college I was acting, and community, and I was Bill Sykes in Oliver, and if anyone remembers the villain in Oliver, I was in all sorts of things like that. Anyway, and I made some realizations about the nature of rejection between acting and writing. Two things that made me realize that I would go with the writing. In rejection, in acting, the business comes first and the art comes second, and in writing, the art comes first and the business comes second. What I mean by that is, if I want to act, I need permission. I need to have a director hire me. I need other actors. I need a theater and money for sets, and et cetera, et cetera. And someone has to say, okay, now you're allowed to act. Doing a soliloquy in my own room is not acting. But with writing, whether anyone bought this story or not, I'm so grateful you guys bought the story in the new issue. It would be done. It exists, whether it's sold in 6 months or it's sold in 10 years, or my son is sending it off to people after I'm dead. The art part is done and the business came second. And so I would not have permission to complete my art. And the other thing about rejection is, when you send in a story to a magazine or anthology or whatever, by the time you get the answer, in your head you're going, they're probably gonna, what are the odds? Look at the odds, that's probably gonna come back anyway, Even though I'm confident I like the story, I said, well, yeah, if I count the number of rejections and number of acceptances, I'm up over several thousand rejections for the 111 stories. So the odds are they'll be rejected. So when it comes, you're sort of disappointed, but you're not surprised, and you send it off to the next place. Well, actors get up there, they're on stage, they're in the middle of the monologue, they're feeling it, they're in love with themselves. They're thinking, I am Laurence Olivier and Meryl Streep rolled into one, and in the middle of the scene you hear, next, and they throw you off the stage. So to me, that's extremely crushing, separate from the fact you need permission. And yet I had a friend in high school who went and did it. There's a guy named Bill Forsyth. We were in Fiorello together in high school. You may know him. You saw him as Flat Top and Dick Tracy. He was in Raising Arizona as one of the hoodlums. He was Manny the Butcher in Boardwalk Empire. He's been in like 150 different things. He moved out. He left high school. Didn't hear about him for a couple of years. Next thing I know, I'm turning on Hill Street Blues. I think it was Hill Street. It was before NYPD Blue. And he's in there as some guy who killed his girlfriend. I said, wait, that's Bill Forsyth. And I caught up with him. It turned out he went out there. He spent a year on his friend's couches, not having an apartment, just going to auditions all the time and working as a waiter and all that kind of stuff. And that's a different skill, that you have to decide whether you're up for that skill or not. So who knows about the alternate branching universe in which I was doing things like that. But that helped. But why do we get on this topic? Reading. I mean, that's what helped with reading.
Yeah.
They say, okay, I'm comfortable getting up there. And what happened? I see another cat. What should have happened is you two should have the same colored cat or something, and it would move from one screen to another, and people would be very confused. But But anyway, yeah, who knows? And maybe someday, not that I ever gonna have time for it. I love the writing too much. It'll be fun to act again in something someday. And I go off on a whole tangent about that. But what else do people? Anything out there that people want to hear?
Yeah, does anybody have any questions that they're burning to ask?
It's like, why doesn't Scott have an animal walking around? I don't.
My dog doesn't normally feel the need to get up in my lap, but I was gone all weekend, so he is extra.
Here, I have Jack Williamson.
Extra clingy right now.
I don't have a pet. I'll just put up little inspirational sculptures I have around the office. I have a plinth with Jack Williamson on it. A 6 foot tall one of these exists in Portales, New Mexico, and Eastern New Mexico University in front of the library named after him. And it was donated by the Chinese science fiction fans who love Jack's stuff. And one year at the Jack Williamson lecture, they said, gee, we're bringing some of these. You think anyone would want them? And I think they brought 20. This is heavy. This is pig iron. It's really heavy. And they all vanished within about 5 minutes. Like every writer there wanted to buy some of these. So I find it inspiring. Jack Williamson is my role model for how to exist in the science fictional world. He lived to be 98 3/4. If you saw him at a convention, he was always surrounded by people several generations younger than himself. He was always very humble. I remember when I was editing Science Fiction Age, and I was on a panel with Gardner Dozois and Gordon Van Gelder, who was editing FNSF at the time, Gardner obviously doing Asimov's, and it was a what the editors want panel, and you've probably been on some of those. This is at PhilCon. And the panel generally always had 30 or 40 newcomers, people there who were trying to make those first couple of sales. And one day we were there and we're looking out at the panel, and it's like, Jack, what are you doing sitting in this panel? Well, I just want to find out what you all want. Jack, we want the stories that you're writing. He was and I saw him do the same thing at the FNSF panel when Christine Catherine Rush took over from Ed Furman, and there's sort of a changing the guard panel. And there was Jack. I went to that, but there was Jack in the front row, wanting to find out what the new fantasy and science fiction was going to be like. And it was, and so he's always very humble and very open and very, trying to. We're all doing this together, and I'm not Mr. Williamson. I'm Jack. He would say that to people. So. He was just, and he managed to be the oldest person I think to ever win a Hugo or Nebula or something in his 90s, and so I just sort of admire the way he, never saw him get angry at people or jealous or it's just a great role model. So I have him on my desk here.
We have a few questions. Will wants to know, Scott, have you ever considered merging your two pieces of art and writing a screenplay?
Have I? Well, the times I have done things related to television, I was very disappointed in the result. They were all accidental. I had a couple of episodes of Tales from the Dark Side, if anyone remembers that. It was sort of like a Twilight Zone B kind of show. And they liked some of my horror comics that I wrote for DC for House of Mystery and House of Secrets. They ended up adapting one and getting me to pitch others. And the final work is not what well, basically, just to get to the punchline of this, since we're running out of time, you don't have the control you do with a story. For everything I've done for other media, whether it has been cartoon work for Hanna-Barbera or those episodes of Tales from the Dark Side, there's a lot of monkeying going around. The Tales from the Dark Side episode, the once they messed up and made it so, I hated it so much, I almost took my name off it and put a pseudonym on it. And with fiction, things pretty much get published as you submitted them. You go back and forth to clarify things to make sure that it say what you wanted to say and that this makes sense. But I've never had a situation like that. So I wanted to say what I want to say. I don't want to get more money, even though I still get little residuals 30 years later from those Tales from the Dark Side in a small way. I wanted to say what I wanted to say, not what a committee wanted to say. So probably I won't.
Murray wants to know what's your favorite story that hasn't sold yet.
Oh my goodness. Oh wow. Well, oh gee. I've got about 10 of them that are circulating at the moment. They're all so different. My favorite story well, I'll tell you the one that I'm most surprised. You know, there are some. I mean, I love them. I can't choose. But there's one I'm the most surprised that no one has wanted, and you guys rejected it too. So we can even talk about that. But again, it's taste, as I said at the beginning of the show. There's no problem with it. Anyway, it's been rejected. 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. So I got for the 16th market. I had a story called "The Darkness Within." It's set in Antarctica with penguins and you know, Antarctic explorers, modern times, you know, visions of past times and things like that, and an evil penguin, you know, there's like an omen of a penguin running around, and so there were some separate from what I like and what I don't like. There were some that you say, oh, this one's going to be an easy one, you know, that I look at and I say this sort of has an easily understandable arc that even though I may be doing weird things with it, you know, punches enough buttons in terms of the pacing of what I think people will expect, that should be an easy sell. And often those can end up taking longer than the ones that just say, oh, this is really an odd one. And then that one goes immediately. So anyway, so that doesn't really answer the question, but that's one of the ones you know, I like that I'm surprised that people didn't take, and I'm just trying to get weirder and weirder. I mean, that's the I'm trying to do things that it's hard for me to do. If I don't have a possibility of failure, then I don't want to do it. I would rather be the Olympic diver trying to do that thing where, you know, even if you don't do it perfectly, it's a high score, rather than doing something easy and get it 100% right, because what have I learned? So that doesn't really answer the question, but
that's okay.
That's as close as I'm getting tonight.
Gene O'Neill says, Scott, you are a great editor at Science Fiction Age. Any chance you're doing it again?
I think not. And I loved it. It is a wonderful thing to do, but I would rather tell the story than help bring the other stories to life. But every time I've been, if I could do both, if I could do them both, I would, but it ends up my subconscious only serves one master at a time, and every time I've edited, my writing has fallen off tremendously, drastically, because I'll wake up in the middle of the night, and what I'll wake up in the middle of the night with is, you know what I could do for the next editorial? You know what we could have a column on? Oh, here's what we should have on the cover. Oh, here's some cover blurs we should use. Instead, I wake up in the middle of the night, and my subconscious is my best collaborator. I wake up in the middle of the night. If I don't know what's happening next in the story, I could do what I said at all the beginning of this. I could sit and write every possible branch for what could happen next in the story. Or I'll say, well, I'll just go to bed. I'll figure it out. And I'll wake up in the middle of the night. Oh, yeah, that's what's supposed to happen. Sort of like shaking up a snow globe. That's what my brain is, I think. I go to sleep, and I will wake up, and I will literally know the next 2 or 3 sentences of the story. And I will write them down in the dark and pray that it will be legible come morning. But so that's why I never really have any fear. And the only writer's block, I'll just throw that out in my life, the only writer's block I ever had in my life, since it's election day, it's a perfect time to mention it. The only writer's block came as a result of the 2016 presidential election results. And I could not, it wasn't that I couldn't write, it's that I could not think of what was worth writing that was commensurate to the times in which we lived. So basically what happened was, no, I cannot just write a story. I have to write a story that matters in this world we're in. I ended up writing a story called The Stranded Time Traveler Embraces the Inevitable, which ended up selling to Cat Rambo's anthology, If This Goes On, which was put on as a result of Charlottesville and all the things that were going on in the country. That's where it ended up selling. So that was really the only time when I had, and for me, that was just a few weeks of saying, what can I write that's going to matter now? So,
anyway. I think Jason and I can both commiserate with the not having time to work on our own writing because we're always editing.
Yeah. I mean, it's good. I mean, it was certainly helpful reading those 10,000 stories a year, in that you learn by seeing things and you say, well, okay, I'm not going to do that, or I'm not going to do this, or by seeing how this story that's almost there in another person, I can tell them how to take it from 90% to 99%. That teaches me when I have a problem like that how to do it. So there are a lot of skills to have learned, but if science fiction age is going on for more than 8 years, didn't write much. If I got one story a year, two is a lot for me back then. And so it is a difficult thing to do both at the same time.
Yeah. And I think we have time for one more question. And Risa Wolf says, how do you come up with your titles?
I went and looked at my list of titles, and they've become a lot more poetic all the time. This particular title, as those who go on Patreon for Apex will see something that I've shared. I don't know when you guys will be sharing it on your Patreon. I destroyed all my manuscripts. Nothing really exists except the final draft. All those stories with all my scrolls all over them, they don't exist. The only raw manuscripts of mine that exist is when I've written it and it happened in a journal, where I write all my other thoughts about my life. And I happen to have the opening scene for learning to accept what's to come. And I wrote 3 pages in one of my moleskin notebooks. And I stopped writing at the end of the 3rd page, because the end of the 3rd page was, I think, one character to another character, you'll just have to learn to accept what's to come. And I said, okay, I'm stopping now. That's the title of the story. So sometimes it is that where a particularly poetic line comes out from the story. There was one story of mine that's just coming out in another market called The More Loving One. And it's sort of a surreal fantasy about where I don't want to spoil it. One of the characters in it is the sun. And The More Loving One is a line from a W.H. Auden poem about the stars, where he says, if one loves more than the other, let the more loving one be me. And he's talking about the stars. And this particular story, which is about stars and the sun and everything, I just started Googling poems about the stars, songs about the stars, looking for cliches about the stars. And I was looking for those. There's another story I have coming up on Daily Science Fiction, which is about the text hidden under all the text words we write. The title of that one is a quote from a Rumi phrase. The message behind the words is the voice of the heart. That's a story that's coming out. So a lot of it has come from songs and poetry, and sometimes I accidentally write a poetic enough line in the story itself. But I recently compared my first 10 published stories with the 10 most recent, and they've gotten far more innate and far more complicated than they used to be. I like those poetic convoluted titles that we used to do a lot of back during the New Wave. People used to do a lot of back in the 70s.
So, Scott, before we wrap up, where can people find you?
I'm not giving out my home address, though people can probably figure it out.
I didn't mean literally find you.
Okay. Well, I'm on Twitter as long as it lasts. It's ScottEdelman.com. I am, ScottEdelman.com. As a website, I'm Scott Edelman on Instagram. I probably only mentioned the podcast early on at the beginning, but I have 184 episodes of a podcast called Eating the Fantastic, where I've been doing it since 2016, where I take writers, editors, agents out for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, clip on microphones, and you eavesdrop at the table while we're chatting. Most recently, I had Michael Swanwick was on an episode, and Eileen Gunn was on that episode, and coming up in a week and a half will be a new World Fantasy Award winner, Ognachawi Damilu Ekpeki. I recorded during Worldcon, and we had a wonderful conversation. That'll be the next episode. It's called Eating the Fantastic, and if this voice is not drilling holes in your head by now, It's all free. Just, either go to eatingthefantastic.com or go over to Apple Podcasts, and you could hear three or 350 hours of me chatting with all sorts of wonderful people.
Well, thank you so much for being with us tonight for our happy hour. Everyone, you can read Scott's first Apex story, Learning to Accept What's to Come, right now in issue 134 by either purchasing an issue or subscribing. It will be online December 20th. Thank you so much for being here, Scott. It's always
Thanks
fascinating to get to chat with
Good
you.
to see everybody, and thanks for publishing the story. I can't wait to hear that balance on that meter between Leslie's devastating and Scott's bittersweet love story. I want to hear what the reaction of the readers is once it's out.
I'm excited to see what people think, because
everybody and no one is wrong. That's the wonderful thing about it. Once it's out in the world, everybody is right. I just know what I felt as I wrote it. I was getting choked up in a happy kind of romantic way, as opposed to, oh my God, life is horrible. So that's me.
I'm gonna have to go back and reread it with a romantic eye. That's not an eye I read with that often. So
well, as Ted Sturgeon once said, most of his stories are love stories. I think most of my stories are love stories too, if you look closely at them.
Well, thank you so much. Bye,
Thanks
everyone.
for having me. Till next time.
Bye.